Hello, I'm going to talk about more intercultural communication. I think intercultural communication is probably one of the most valuable skills, and I'm just giving you a snapshot with these communication cultures I'm reviewing. But you should become a student of intercultural communication, just as someone who is navigating, we have a multicultural society, but and if you're in a leadership program, if you're going to be in any type of place where you are having to manage people or time, it is a really great skill to be able to understand how to adapt. So the very first thing I'm going to talk about is Edward T. Hall. Edward T. Hall is high context and low context culture and monochronic and polychronic culture. And he developed his communication cultures as an anthropologist. And as an anthropologist, he was doing ethnography type of research, which means he was observing cultures and trying not to disturb the culture. Anthropologists do a lot more ethnography, where they're trying to get more qualitative kind of data and then look for patterns and interpret what the nonverbal and verbal codes that they are witnessing. I think Star Trek is great. I bet most anthropologists can really appreciate what Star Trek is trying to do. Because Star Trek is boldly going across the universe to discover, to explore the world and interact with all these different alien life forms, but they have a very important prime directive, which is to do no harm. And so they're very much in the Edward T. Hall anthropology kind of mindset in Star Trek, which is why it's a little different than other um, like future sci-fi type of shows. I'll get into that another time. That's just an example. Okay, so let's talk about high context and low context culture. A high context culture is a culture that is primarily nonverbal. That means that even though you have verbal messages, speech happening, the messaging or the way to decode the messages are in the nonverbal. One way to think about it is subtext, though that is not completely accurate of a term. Uh, a visualization would be the iceberg, to bring the iceberg back, that high context has these interactions, but what's not being said has more importance than the surface level of the interaction. High context cultures, prime directive is to take care of the relationship, to take care of others. And so the opportunity of an interaction is the opportunity to build relationships. Low context culture is a much more verbal culture. A low context culture is a culture that opinion is highly valued. The messaging that happened, it's almost the opposite, where uh, all of the icebergs above the water and there's just a little bit on the below. More think of it like there's a big mountain and then there's a little bit underneath the surface. So there's not going to say it's completely not nonverbals and context don't matter at all in low context. There is some of that is impacting the conversation, but most of the messaging is very transparent. It's super literal. It's exact and it's to the point. Uh, because low context culture value is a highly verbal culture, it values speaking efficiently, to the point, being exact, removing the fluff, and getting right to it. Which doesn't mean that you can't have over talkers you can of course have over talkers in a low context culture. It's just what they're saying is exactly what they mean. Okay. Uh, when we talk about a high context culture, and which has a lot more ritual and ceremony to the conversation, cultural kind of rules to the way a conversation is supposed to go. Each element of it has a purpose. And so that you are building something much stronger over here in that relationship piece that's the experience that high context culture has. Low context culture, because you're supposed to get right to the point, you're supposed to know your answer and know how to say it and know how to say it briefly. So if I say, where should we go to lunch? Or what color should the curtains in the living room be? Um, how much would you charge for this? Low context culture is going to expect an exact answer and no preamble, no reason why. You can leave the because out of it. I just want the answer, right? Uh, so that sounds like I want to go to Chipotle for lunch. Blue curtain. I need blue curtains in the living room. I want, uh, it'll cost $20 for me to da 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 da, right? Okay, boom, that's it. Those would be really beautiful low context answers. They would be an intercultural disaster over here in high context. And so maybe just even as before, I'm going to give you a lot more about these two cultures, but even right at the beginning, you can see how you could get an intercultural clash right away. And in fact, this is going to manifest in a lot of different ways. It can be very generational. So in your family, you could have some of your family members more high context and maybe more low context. That could be because of generations. We definitely know that some generations come from, even if they're all from the United States, maybe you have generational family here in the United States, have been here for generations, you could still end up with high context and low context just because of the shift and change in culture to a less formal culture, which expects a lot more to the point kind of type of quick, fast communication. You could have it in a different way. It could manifest in the family if you have your father's family comes from a different cultural background than your mother's family might come from a different cultural background. And your parents experiencing a high-low context culture meant that you noticed the friction in the relationship, but it may have given you the skill, as I described this, to code switch, or you know how to move into high context or low context. And that would be a communication competency. That's a question I often get. Maybe you're asking that question right now. Is anyone asking this question? The question is that I often hear is, can you be both? Can you be both high and low context? Well, yeah, we are the cosmopolitan identity. That's a theory called the cosmopolitan identity, is in a pluralistic society, or because we can travel like we've never been able to travel in human history before. We have so much more experience, intercultural experiences, that if you are a high self-monitor and you're tuned into this, experiences of difference within family or in other experiences, you might know how to code switch. I would say, is there one that you feel like you can settle into and you feel a lot more comfortable just being yourself in? That might be a better way to think about the spectrum that these cultures exist on. Okay, so let's talk a bit about low context, and then I'll get into high context, because high context, because it's not the predominant culture, the dominant culture of the United States, I think it takes a little bit more nuance or time to talk about. But low context is the dominant culture. That means that the literal meaning of the message is the message that I'm sending, and I'm not sending any other message. So what I say is exactly what I mean. Now, I already gave the examples of that brevity type of answers, but sometimes the answers are longer. Sometimes if someone has more power in the relationship, they often get used to being using a lot more verbiage. They might still mean exactly what they mean. I'm just going to give you all of the details about this project or this upcoming business trip or conference we're going to. And then they kind of take over the team meeting with this over talking, but it's still in a low context meaning that they, even if they're rambling on, which it's often rambling, when someone has power, they often, without even knowing it, they've moved into rambling, that they mean exactly what they mean and they don't mean anything else. And they're not going to leave it up to nuance. So this is like pharmaceutical commercials or legal documents. Sheldon is very low context. And he does talk a lot in the show too, right? So maybe that's a really good example now that I'm thinking about it. That Sheldon loves contracts and he loves the legal thing and the everything to be very exact. That's a very low context. Some of my assignments in my class and my syllabus might have very exact low context language. If you miss a team meeting, this, then this, and this. And when you do this assignment, please do A, B, and C. And then sometimes, and some of you have had me more than one class know this, you'll get an assignment from me and it doesn't have low context language, that it's much more abstract. And that would be my way of shifting the power of the relationship for there to be room for interpretation, that my exact definition doesn't have to be the exact definition. So look, if you feel like, whoa, she didn't tell me the instructions for this, maybe we've moved to um, more power for you in interpreting it. It's good to think about that. So low context loves that brevity. They like to be exact, and they're very transparent and literal in their message. Is there anything else I want to say about that? Let's move to high context, and then we'll interweave the intercultural communication aspects. So high context message is very prime directive relationship driven. High context is all about how am I going to show my respect and how am I going to make sure the other person isn't offended if they're okay. And high context has this primary concern. So when high context dialogues start, there's usually a greeting. We're going to start building the conversation. Even if I have this question at the top of where should we go to lunch, that is not going to be the first thing I'm going to say. And in fact, it might take several minutes to get to the point of the conversation. And of course, the dream of high context culture is to never have to ask the question at all. Because if both people are in the same high context culture, then that means that as I am talking, you are understanding the nonverbal and decoding the message of the conversation, and you're taking in all the context of the moment and the relationship, and you can answer the question even before it's asked. What? How does that happen? I have an example. I'll share it with you. So before I share it with you, let's get to that, remembering that there is a greeting. So the greeting is usually defining the relationship and the context of the conversation. So it's not just, hey, Bob, where do you want to go to lunch? No, it's, hi, boss Bob, teacher Bob, student Bob, coworker Bob. There's going to be some type of, in the greeting, the formal way that you greet in high context is you will lay whatever the relationship dimension is, will usually be stated out loud. So often I have a student who sends me an email. Sometimes they'll say Professor Sheldrick. So as soon as I hear professor, and then Sheldrick, especially last name. Now I'm getting that we have a much more formal interaction, and maybe there's more high context. I'm going to be on alert for a more high context interaction, as opposed to, and definitely this shifts and changes the better you know someone, or the more, I don't know if better you know someone. That's not what I meant. This shifts and change through the intimacy of a relationship. But for example, my mom, I am always going to address her as mom, and that means that title gives the relationship its dimension. And I'm going to go through this formalness of the greeting and asking how she is and what's going on in her day. Even if I have a question I want to ask my mom, I am definitely not going to do that for at least 3 to 5 minutes of conversation first, or else, whew, I could get a call from my dad and be in trouble because I've offended my mother, right? Like there is a demand in high context culture for this formality. All right. So then, as we get through the conversation, I'll just use my mom as an example. My mom, years ago, used to work for hospice, and she had a dog that she would take to these hospice appointments to sit with people, while terminally ill people or people who are put on a hospice as they're moving through towards death. And my mom was very calm entity, and she brought this dog, and she trained this dog to be a very still and quiet dog and just sit all cuddled up with a patient in their bed. And so my mom's very protective of this dog. That's the point. I want, like, this dog, my mom really, really spent a lot of time training it. And part of it was to never leave it alone, never to let the dog feel like any sense of abandonment at all. So that means that even if my mom was going to the store, she wouldn't want to leave the dog alone, even if it's to pick up one thing at the store. My mom does not leave this dog alone. And so I live about a mile from my mom. So I would get a call, and the call would go like this. It's very my mom's very high context. Luckily, I understand this now. And when I was younger, it used to drive me crazy, and we would have a lot of friction in our dialogue. But now I just sit patiently and wait. Hello, Sarah. How was your day? How did that thing go that you were going to do? Right. And I'd ask my mom, how was her day? How is this going? And then my mom starts in on the next part of the conversation, which is about dinner and what my dad's favorite dinner is and how she's going to make that tonight. But, oh, unfortunately, I'm missing an ingredient, or however it comes up, right? And as a dutiful daughter who's been raised to understand all the messaging that's being sent that's not being said, I will say, do you want me to watch the dog so you can run to the store? Oh my God, really? Would you do that? That would be so kind. Okay, I'll drop off the dog. I'll be there in about 10 minutes. Perfect. I don't mind. I look forward to seeing you then. Bye. Never even had to ask the question, right? Because I already knew how to decode the message. That it was a very high context. And it doesn't mean my mom didn't care about my day, and it means I didn't care about my mom's day, but we were in a formality. The formalness and the norms of that culture demand this preamble type of dialogue before you get to the point. So in low context culture, this is almost offensive, and you're just getting really lost. So where do you want to go to lunch? And then all of a sudden the conversation's about every place we ever had for lunch. And, oh, remember the time we went here for lunch? And what about this? And should we do la, 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 la? And I'm like, I just want to, lunch is in like 5 minutes. Where do you want, do you even care where we go to lunch? Why, what do you want to do? Right? Low context gets like they want to pull out their hair. Low context gets really lost. I think the feeling mostly from low context is just, I don't even know what this conversation is about anymore. Why are we talking about this when the question was this? Like, there's just a feeling of lostness. And low context will often, because of the pressure of time, which we're about ready to get to monochronic and polychronic, will often interrupt a high context person when they're in the intercultural encounter in order to move things along. And high context will be like, I just want to know where to go. Oh, so we went there for lunch. Great. We love that. Let's go there. Is that where you want to go? High context gasp. Oh my gosh, I must have offended you. I must, the relationship, you're frustrated with me. Oh my gosh, I just want to have a good lunch with you, but now you're frustrated and upset. How are we going to repair this relationship? And now we have to rewind and start the conversation all over and now do the repair work of repairing the relationship. Like if I had interrupted my mother, hey mom, what's up? Did you need anything? It's just like, we're gonna get that. Oh my gosh, I've offended you. Is everything okay? Right? It's not like my mom's all of a sudden gonna go, oh yeah, let me get to the point. Can you watch the dog? I got to go to the market, which I think could be sent with emojis in a text, right? It could be, I've thought about this. Which three emojis could you do to like puppy paws, car, and a house? I don't know, like question mark. And I would do thumbs up. I wouldn't even reply back. I would just hold it down and get that thumbs up. And then my mom would pull up to the house. That's my idea of a great low context conversation. But we know that if high context people are in, if you ask a high context person a question, they're going to take 3 to 5 minutes to answer, depending on how that person, they just average around 3 to 5 minutes. If you interrupt, because 3 minutes, oh boy, that is a long time. If you interrupt, they're going to need to do the repair work, rewind, and now you could be in a 20-minute conversation. And I'm telling you, 3 minutes, as long as it is a lot shorter than 20 minutes. So sometimes it's worth it to anecdotally conduct your own little experiment if you think you're talking to a high context person, to actually not interrupt, to just patiently, attentively listen and hear where they're going with the message. Now, if you have an overtalker, that's a different story. If you have someone who's a really low self-monitor and can't pick up social cues or lacks the ability to pick up social cues for whatever reason it is, you would have to try a different strategy. And there are strategies for those as well. Maybe someone will ask that as a question this term or discuss it. Okay, so let's talk about, that's high context, low context. That's Edward T. Hall. Edward T. Hall has another one, monochronic and polychronic. So I'm going to talk about those next. Monochronic culture is a culture that sees time, chronic time, monochronic, as finite. And the experience of time is that we should all be experiencing time exactly the same. There's a feeling of similarity and unity about the experience of time, which is actually impossible to have a unified experience of time, which is why sometimes someone goes, why is this taking so long? And the other person's, what? This is speeding by. And we could be in the same room at this, and we still have different experiences of time. But monochronic culture's hope and dream is that we all experience time the same, which means we have clocks. And what it means to be on time is to be early. So then when the time strikes, we can all go in unison right out of the gate. And there's more attention to the measurement of time. Monochronic culture, because time is finite, you can run out of it. It's a scarce resource. You could waste time. You can save time. You can lose time, right? There's all these things we can do with time. And for a monochronic culture, that metaphorically connects to money. So money is time, and you can waste money, you can save money, you can spend your money wisely, you can spend your time wisely. You're just getting the point, I hope, of however we refer to money in monochronic culture is how we refer to time. So that means that polychronic culture, Edward T. Hall identifies polychronic culture as the experience of time as being a plentiful resource, an infinite resource. And in fact, time is not really measured with beginnings and ends. Time is a river, a flowing river. It's deep and wide, and there is enough to go around. Do you need some time? Here you go. I have some for you. Here's some time. Oh, doesn't that sound lovely? I am much more monochronic culture, and I grew up in a monochronic culture, and it is the dominant culture in the United States. So it is definitely a different experience of time that is a little foreign for me. So as I talk about it, it's just really a dream. Now, on the spectrum of monochronic to polychronic, some polychronic cultures experience time as so infinite that even death isn't the end of time, that there is usually this feeling of reincarnation or a belief structure and of reincarnation that makes it so there's even more fluidness to time. And because of that, polychronic cultures say that, again, time is a resource and it's to be used to take care of relationships and show respect, which monochronic wants to show respect too, but in a different way. But we're going to use this. So if I'm in a conversation with my mom and we were in a polychronic culture and that conversation was going really well, and we were really in a place of synergy and because of the respectful dimensions of parent to child, a polychronic culture says it is, as the child especially, I am not the one that has any power to end that conversation, that I am there until it's over, whatever that looks like and whenever that is. But what if I have an appointment? What if I told my friends I was going to meet them for coffee? If I'm in this dialogue first, in a polychronic culture, that's okay. We said we were going to meet at 1, but we'll probably all show up around 2 or 2:30. And that's okay. That's a much more in the culture of polychronic, that makes more sense. And maybe you have traveled someplace or in more rural parts of the United States or in some marginalized group, cultural groups that have like neighborhoods or cultural significant locations, and they're not the dominant culture group. They might have developed a more polychronic culture, and you may have been there and you would have experienced that time felt very different in the way the interactions were happening. I bet we have some good examples out there. I'd love to hear them. Monochronic culture. So let's spend the rest of the time talking about monochronic culture, and then we'll talk about power distance because I'm still going to get to that one. So a monochronic culture that has this unity or infinite or finite feeling of time now becomes a channel for me to send a message. And I'm going to send that message through about time, and it's going to be decoded as either this relationship is a relationship of power. What is the power dynamics or hierarchy of it? Or we're going to talk about how to use time to show respect. And the pressure is on. Monochronic culture puts so much pressure on how you talk about time, how you use your time, and even this kind of disease of busyness is kind of this other way that monochronic culture wants to define your worth by how you use your time. And how you can click through a lot of different activities and da 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 da. That's what monochronic cultures has a lot of concern about that. So let's talk about power. So the relationship has you either have a relationship dimension of solidarity, and that means we're peers or we're equals, or there's a relationship of power, of hierarchy, and the status of each of the individuals sometimes has a label that's put on it by society or our cultural groups, like teacher student, just by the dynamics of that relationship. Society has expectations and it's a status relationship. Same with parent or child, or um, I don't know, what's another one? Doctor and patient is another great example, as opposed to a friendship or a romantic relationship where things are supposed to be more, have a sense of equality, though depending on uh, your culture group, sometimes religious groups do put dimensions of power divided by gender into the marital relationship or the family relationship. I'm not going to get too much into that, but it's just to take note of that. It has an impact as well. Well, whatever it is, whatever the expectation, you are dealing with this. And monochronic culture says the person who has more power does not have to wait, and the person who has less power has to wait. So how much waiting you do is a status or demotion, a demotion, to whatever the relationship is. And that means that if you have to wait, you might start to feel it almost as a physically painful experience because of the status injury you're experiencing for waiting. Because monochronic culture puts so much pressure on who waits for who. Sometimes we're willing to wait. Like, oh, I finally got into that medical specialist. My doctor put in the request and I finally got the paperwork, and then the office called, and yeah, it's a 6-month waiting list, but I finally got in, right? Like maybe like that gives it so much more, that group so much more power, and there's so much more energy in that. And I do want to note, like, even medical is a great example of waiting room wait. Like, not only do you wait for your appointment, getting an appointment, you get in the door, and then you have to wait in the waiting room, and then you get taken back. You finally get into a room to see the doctor, and what do you do in that room? You got to wait some more. And every time you're doing those different levels of waiting, the hierarchy becomes even more stretched out. And this is often why doctors and patients have a hard time being in a vulnerable and interpersonal relationship because of these hierarchicals or statuses. And sometimes why doctors or a patient might feel like, I don't want to take up too much of your time, or sometimes there's some hesitancy, uh, or sometimes there's a feeling of injury by that point, and we're losing trust in that relationship. Thank you, monochronic culture, for all the high context messaging that comes with that, the implicit biases. Okay, the next one is with monochronic culture, we want to think about how we show respect. So when we want to show something is important to us or that it has value, we are on time. And a monochronic culture says being early is being on time, and being on time is being late. So that phrasing is very monochronic culture. And in that means that when we are in the deciding what to do with our time, or how we lead up to something. If we are early to it, it shows what was happening beforehand that gives that moment, the event or the person, the respect that it deserves by being early, because you actually devoted a lot more energy and time. So let's say I have a job interview and in another city, and I've never been to that building before, and I really want this job. Oh, I hope I get it. They actually called me in for an interview. They sent me the interview questions, and they've asked me to do a short presentation. I am going to practice that presentation. I'm going to make sure if I'm bringing any slides or any type of demo or a prop, I'm going to have it all ready. I'm going to have a backup plan. I'm going to put a lot of thought process. And then the interview questions, I'm going to make sure I do a whole writing out each one, but then I'm going to verbally practice it. I might even get on a call with a friend or a mentor and tell them what I'm thinking of answering and seeing if I can get some more nuance and practice it with someone else listening and get feedback. Okay. And then I might put a lot of energy into thinking about what I'm going to wear to the interview, what feels appropriate, the difference between why do we dress up for something versus even if everyone in that field goes in t-shirts and jeans, I'm not going to show up in the interview in a t-shirt and jeans because I want to show the energy and time I put in to show respect. So the time you put into something to go to that moment of showing up is part of monochronic culture's language of respect. Uh, And then, of course, if it's in a city or in a building that I've never been to, not only am I going to personally, not only will I have it ready on GPS mapping, but just in case, I probably would print it out. I would, if I could, I will memorize the route. I'll make sure all that's in my car. I'll make sure my gas is ready to go. My car is ready, or whatever my transportation is as secure as possible. And because I live in the Willamette Valley and it's summer, I better make sure I leave it enough time that if I'm behind a tractor for 5 miles, that I can absorb that time into making sure I'm early to my appointment. So these are like thinking about how you think about time leading up to something is the way monochronic culture demands that is how you show respect. Now, this trickles down into our romantic relationships, into our friendships, and the time can really erode the trust, or we can start to feeling status injuries in our relationships by the way we're experiencing how someone's showing up for us, or if we have set up a pattern or a habit that violates monochronic culture's prime directives about time is a finite resource and needs to be respected. Unfortunately, in our romantic relationships, this is why time can often become a point of argument and pain, actually feeling physical pain around. And we want to think about the status injury that's going on with that. My husband and I were both married. We're both, I'm in my second marriage, if you haven't heard me talk about this yet. But both of us were in relationships where we felt the injury of having to wait for the other. And that was when we came into this relationship, that was something we talked about. And I said, well, I'm a woman and it takes me a minute to get ready. And I can be ready to leave when you tell me what time we're going to leave. If you just come up to me and say, hey, do you want to do something? You have to expect I'm going to need this amount of time. And I promise that is the amount of I will meta communicate. I need 10 minutes or I need 15 minutes. And my husband does that to me. He says, hey, let's go out to dinner. How much time do you need? or does, like he's going to meta communicate and ask. And I've made a commitment. I mean, I don't have a problem with this. I really am like obsessed with time. So like I'm monochronic all the way here. Uh, and I will be like, if I do 15 minutes, set 5-minute increment alarms on my watch and I make sure I'm moving along and not getting distracted and I'm ready to go. Where, and I expect him, when he tells me he's going to arrive to pick me up or whatever it is, or if we're leaving for an event, we agree on the time we want to be at the door before we leave, or I meta communicate. This is really important that I'm a half hour early to it, even though it starts at this time. It's really important to me that I walk through the door 30 minutes early. So we just meta communicate that as part of the intercultural piece, though neither of us, we're both pretty monochronic. Uh, in it, it's these past injuries status injuries that we received from previous relationships that have impacted us to make it a priority how we use time and talk about time in our relationship. Oh, okay. Let me take a drink and then I'm going to go into the last thing, which is power. Okay. I did Edward T. Hall, high context, low context. We did monochronic and polychronic. And now I'm going to bookend the end of this with Hofstede, which in the other video I posted that goes with this one, I've talked about uncertainty avoidance. I talked about individualism and collectivism. Those were both Hofstede as well. And Hofstede has even more achievement culture, nurturing culture, and many other communication cultures. It's just impossible in a class about conflict management for me to go through all of them. So I'm just choosing the ones that impact us. So let's talk about power. His definition of power distance is really the extent of people without power, the people who don't have the power, or the person who doesn't have the power, except that some people in the institution or the organization or society will have more power, and with that, more privilege than other people or themselves, right? It's the people without power that decide the power distance and the acceptance of power. So Hofstede really comes that power only exists when it is accepted. If it's not accepted, it doesn't exist as power. And you can think about that in your own experiences if you ever had, whether you had a boss or a manager or a coach that you didn't respect and you lost trust for, maybe you conformed enough to get through the activity or to get your job done, but you really didn't, the fact that they lost your trust or respect, you didn't give them as much power as maybe their position or they expected to have. So power comes from the accepted members of the people without power. And it's also the expectation of the way power is distributed unequally. So do you accept that some people in the organization have different sets of rules than other people in the organization? Or do you expect everyone in the organization to be accountable to the same rules no matter what? So if we say there's low power distance or high power distance, it is how much unequal distribution of privilege and power is there, basically. So if we go to low power distance or a small power distance, that means that you still have a power structure. You might still have someone as a manager or someone in authority. This isn't like we're on the spectrum of anarchy and it's a free for all. No, we still have order in low power distance. It's just that the belief structure in low power distance is that inequality is wrong, and that people who are at the top are accountable to the same rules as everyone else in the group, and that they don't get their own special set of rules, or their own special laws, or they, whatever it is, they have accountability just like everybody else in the organization. Low power distance also, when they put someone into a place of power or manager or whatever it is that position is, there is this feeling that if someone else in the group had the qualifications, they could rotate into that position. One way to think about it is like, if you were on a task force, or if you've ever been in a board or a club, uh, or a committee. That's a great one to think about too. And maybe you elect someone into officer positions for a temporary role, that who put their name in, or if someone asked someone if they wanted to be in it and everyone agreed yes, that there's this feeling that anyone in the group who was qualified could have done it. That person's just the person we chose to do it right now. And there is usually a time limit, that whether it's a year or 2 years or just till the task force is done with their job, that we would leave that person in that position just as a temporary power. So that's what low power distance is really interested in. And high power distance, if we go over to high power distance now, or a large power distance, that means that the belief structure is that people who hold positions of power are different. There's something that makes them different than everybody else in the group, and that's why they get the position of power. They have superior qualities. There's something about them, the je ne sais quoi of that person, whether from makes them superior and special, and that's why they get their position of leadership. Their difference is what gives them their power and privilege. And then what we see in organization or groups where people get into those positions of powers, that as soon as they're there, now we'll make the rules, now we'll make the laws, now we'll decide what is right and wrong, what is good and bad, what is evil and good, right? Like there is the power. First we put into this superior being person into power, and then rules get established, as opposed to a low power where we're going to set up all our rules and laws. Then we elect someone into a position of power that is temporary. They can be rotated out, and they're still accountable to all the rules and laws of the rest of the group. In a high power distance, the person who has power is also usually you don't have access to them. The distance part of it becomes much more larger, and you don't really have access to that person. They don't have to be questioned by you. They shouldn't be questioned by anyone. What they say is what goes, and they can say whatever they want, and that would be a much more high power distance structure. And how high power distance structures get established as a culture group is in the primary relationship of a parent and a child. So Hofstede talks a lot about this, that a household with a parent and a child, that the parent is not, sets out all, the parent is the parent. They're just the parent. And then they make the rules for the household. They make the rules for the child, and the child should not question those rules. That is the question. That is the family. And in more collective cultures, of course, this would not just parents, but the elders of the family also would be part of that hierarchy. And so children should, and this is where you get a child who's being defiant and like, why? I don't know why I have to do this. And they're like, because I said so, right? If we have a more cultural established between parent and child in a low power, there's this kind of idea of being consulted. There's a transparency. Okay, so this is a rule that's important, and this is why, and now let's negotiate how you will behave under the parameters of this rule. The rule is we all have to be safe, and we're safe when we're all home by a certain time. Oh, I don't want to. I want to stay out late with my friends. Okay, well, we have this rule. How can you help our family be safe by complying to this rule? Like there's this idea about dialogue, and the person who has power can be consulted. They can be questioned. They are answerable to the rule. The child goes, well, you stayed out too late with your friends. And they're like, yeah, you did. You're right. I did. And I broke that rule. And you're great. That's great to point that out. And I need to be better about that as well. Right. There's like some dialogue to this, like this, that goes on. Um, in a high power distance, family or culture, you don't question the people in power or in the organization or institution, however it's showing up. Okay, that's a lot. I'm done. I am going to cut it off here. There's a lot more. These are huge areas of study. This is just really as we go into week 3 and we start really getting into the nuance of how are we talking about goals and interests, and setting up dialogues, getting more tools in your toolbox. This is a foundational skill to be able to look at a dialogue and see if how much culture is impacting the friction of solving problems or moving through a relationship. If you have any questions, please bring them up, and let's get more into it if I can clarify anything. All right. Talk to everybody later. Bye-bye.